So today I'm going to be doing some prep for a recording session I've got coming up at my studio, and I thought I'd take you guys along for the ride, show you how I do my session prep. Ahead of any session, when a client wants to book in, I'll discuss with them what they want to record, whether it's a single song or EP or album. We'll discuss what they want out of the recording time they're booking in. If they have any demos at all, even if that's literally just a recording from a band practice on a phone, anything just to give me an idea so I can actually hear the songs and hear the arrangement, then I can sort of build an idea of how much time we're going to need in the studio, what's going to be required basically to capture these songs in the best possible way. This is a small local project studio. Hopefully this video will give you sort of like a real world view of what it's like working at this kind of lower level, you know, in a smaller, more local studio. Don't get me wrong, I think I have quite a nice studio, but it is very small. There's still a lot of money in here, don't get me wrong, but yeah, it's relatively modest, and I think in line with what a lot of people watching this are going to be working with. So working at this kind of level, it often, well, generally means that you're going to be working not just as an engineer, you're not just the person plugging in mics and hitting record, you're going to be taking on a sort of producer role where you're going to be really having quite a hands-on involvement in shaping how things sound, deciding what mics are going to be used on things, how you're going to capture different instruments, and that's going to play a big part into the end result and ultimately how it sounds. Likely you're going to be mixing the song as well, so you can make decisions based on all these kind of things. So I'll have that initial discussion with the client. Based on that, I can then do the necessary prep ahead of the session. We'll go into the live room shortly and I'll show you around what I've got set up in there. But to start with, we'll dive into Pro Tools. I like to start with the artist name and the song name. If I know it, the BPM, normally we're going to be recording to a click track. I encourage that. In this case, I don't know the tempo yet, so I'm going to leave that out. I have a general template that is sort of typical of what I would usually set up in the studio, especially if I'm using the house studio kit. Already have stuff like click track set up on there, so I can open a session based on that recording template, and you can see I've got everything color coded. That is just, I think, a good way of like visually identifying everything at a glance, particularly when you end up with quite a lot of tracks in your session. Things can get quite busy quite quickly. So for me, drums are red, bass is pink or purple, guitars are blue, vocals are yellow, extra instruments are usually green. So I have all the tracks that I think I'm going to use, all assigned to the preamps that I think I'm going to use, and I also make a note of what mics I think I'm going to use. Basically, as much work as I can eliminate prior to the session so that I don't have to think about these things on the actual day. There is some stuff that's going to change, might not be sounding right, so you'll swap a mic out, but just giving yourself some good starting points I think really just helps speed the whole process up on the actual day. Yeah, preamp wise in the studio, so I have an RME UFX 3 as my main interface. Over MADI, I have an SSL Alpha Link hooked up to that. And then I have a Focusrite Sapphire Liquid 56 hooked up over ADAT. I think I have around 24 preamp channels that I can use in the studio, which is more than enough really for the bulk of what I'm doing. I generally don't track things live. My studio is very small. You'll see this when you're working in a small space. It becomes difficult to capture things live just because of bleed between mics. I also like to record to click, helps in terms of tightness, and then of course if you later need to do any editing to the grid, any quantizing of drums, anything like that, which I generally try to avoid doing too much of that. I very much go by the mantra that, you know, you try and get it right when you're doing the actual take and as close as possible to the finished result as you can. But yeah, it's good to have things locked into a click just for tightness, and then you do have the freedom to edit things if you do need to later on, especially when you're working with limited time with an artist just because of budget constraints, that sort of thing. If you do need to do a bit of fixing of things, it's good to give yourself that option. What I do often suggest to artists, just to retain some sort of live feel and the energy that you get when you get musicians playing together, is that we'll track drums to start with, and I'll get the bass player, maybe the rhythm guitar, plugged in over DI so that there's no amp bleed going into the drum mics, and we can get, clean separation between everything. We can keep the DI track if we like it. The main thing is getting a good drum takedown, but we can keep the bass if we like it as well, and also keep the guitar and reamp that DI'd guitar later. Same with bass, we can also reamp if we do want an amp tone. If you're going to have a distorted guitar tone, capture a distorted guitar tone and split the DI signal so you've got a clean feed for reamping. I've found that guitarists will play very differently depending on what kind of sound they're playing into. So playing into distortion, a guitarist will play very differently compared to playing into a clean tone. So you really want to get the right tone so that they're going to have the proper feel to their performance that's appropriate for the song. For me, I use amp modelers. You can use plug-in amp modelers, although then you do have latency to think about. I use an amp modeler pedal, which I just picked up recently. I've got the Hot Tone Ampero 2 Stomp, and I can take a clean DI split out. Normally playing live, the artist plays with the drummer live, so that's normally how they would play together, so I'm going to get them to play that way in the studio. I'm going to have a scratch vocal, probably just over an SM58, and I can stick the artist in the vocal booth where that will be isolated enough in terms of vocals where bleeding into the drum mics won't be a worry. And then I'll just have their guitar DI'd and we can retrack that later, or if we like that take then we can reamp that. From there we can record everything else on top of that. Mic and preamp wise, on kick I normally use 3 mics, so I've got those there. A sub kick mic, which I've been using less and less. I used to rely on it a lot for the added low-end weight and kind of sub stuff. I've been moving away from that sound more and more. I think just because, if you end up doing the same thing all the time, you end up getting bored of that. So I like to change it up, try and find different sounds. I still have that in there anyway, in case I do want it. So I'm going to record that. A Sennheiser E901, which is a boundary mic, very similar to the Shure Beta 91. The E901, the Sennheiser for recording, I just find it has a bit more of a modern sound. The way it kind of captures the kick beater I quite like. Kick out is the SEV kick. It just has like a really nice, tight, punchy low end to it. Snare top, I'm going to be using an SE V7X and E604 on snare bottom Sennheiser. I've used varying things on snare. I quite like a Telefunken M80 on snare top. SM57s, you can't go wrong on both snare top and snare bottom. I've been doing the SE V7X on top and bottom quite a lot. I used to use the E604 on snare bottom all the time. It has a bit of a low mid boost that I like that just kind of adds some weight to the snare sound. For hi-hats, I'm going to be using the Shure SM7B. I generally prefer dynamic mics on hi-hats. I feel like the overheads usually sort of capture the top end shimmer and the presence of the hats. I don't really want more of that on my hi-hat mic itself. The hi-hat mic is more there just to fill in the image of the hi-hats. Rack tom and floor tom is going to be the SE V drum. I've been using those on toms lately and I like them a lot. Overheads, I'm going to be trying something new. I bought some of the Bifaley mics. So these are cheap Chinese mics that people have been raving about, saying that they punch way above their weight and sound like way more expensive mics. People have said that before about a lot of mics. MXL comes to mind, Aston, even though they're a British company, they're not Chinese mics, but they're very affordable mics. Sontronics, another British company. These budget mics, which people will rave about for a while, but then over time the hype kind of dies down and people realise, like, actually, these sound fine, but really they don't compare to like your high-end, £1,000 plus microphones. I watched a lot of YouTube videos, video reviews and stuff, and I was really impressed with the sound. Yeah, the price was good enough. I bought a pair of these and then one of the Bifaley V5s. Total for the 3 microphones, it was around £250 with free shipping. You'd easily spend way more than that on one microphone. So yeah, it was hard to say no at that price. So I've got these. I'm going to try these on overheads. I tend to vary a lot between a space pair of large diaphragms, a pair of small diaphragms in XY configuration. For this, I'm going to do a space pair. Then I have some of my trash mics. I have the tin can mic, which is what it says on the tin. No pun intended. It sounds rubbish. There's like no top end, no low end to it. It's very mid-rangey, honky sounding, quite distorted, saturated. But that can sound really cool blended in with a drum mix. I like it so that it's positioned. I actually have it permanently mounted behind the drum throne. I don't always use it in a mix. Yeah, blended in, it can sound quite cool. The tape channel, which is a dictaphone, so an old tape recorder, the microphone built into the tape recorder, which is not built to handle the SPL of a loud drum kit. So it distorts and overloads, but in a cool way that again sounds kind of cool. Blended in to the mix. I'll run the headphone out from the dictaphone out into a DI box, into one of my mic preamps. Got a few room mics. I'm trying a new one for this session, which is going to be my actual AKG C414. The idea is that you set it up in cardioid pattern. You set it up directly in front of the drum kit, but so that the front of the mic is facing away from the drum kit. So the back side that's picking up the least amount of sound is the side that's picking up the most of the actual direct sound of the kit. The front is picking up the most of like the room sound. So in my live room, you'll see it's very heavily acoustically treated. It didn't sound very good untreated. It's a very small space. It's difficult to get small rooms to sound good acoustically a lot of the time. And so I just went for going for a very dead sound in terms of how I treated it, which then means that it's very difficult to get any real kind of room sound. Often if you just stick a room mic up, like a mic further away from the drum kit at the other side of the room, it just kind of sounds like another overhead mic, but a bit further away. You have to kind of be creative with how you utilize room mics in small rooms. My main room mic, which is a mic set further back, but you'll see how I've got that set up when we go into the live room. Usually I run that through my outboard compressor. I have a Symmetrix 501. It's quite a transparent compressor. You can compress a lot on it and get a huge amount of gain reduction without mangling the audio too much, which sometimes you want that, but I quite like the way it kind of transparently can compress quite a lot. If you get the attack and release set right, you can get a bit of like a pumping sound to it as well, which is cool. I have my TL room and EW room. TL stands for toilet, EW is entryway, so I have the entryway of my studio and the little toilet room at the back of the studio. The idea of these when I first moved in was that the classic like sticking a mic in a hallway, a corridor that's an untreated space that can be quite reverberant, can be quite cool as like a drum room mic if you leave the main live room doors open. So that was my thinking with these. To date, they've never really captured anything that works that well for me. So I keep trying them every session, trying different positioning. I'm keeping them in every session for now. It's always good with room mics, particularly when recording drums, just to have some weird throwaway mics, even if it's literally just like sticking an SM58 on the floor in a corner, just sticking a mic somewhere, seeing what it sounds like. You can use it or not use it. It's important to make decisions in terms of how you record things that are going to work with the arrangement and the song. A good example, I think, is always with acoustic guitar. If you're recording a solo artist where it's just a solo acoustic and vocal piece, you're going to want the guitar to fill out a lot more of the mix. In a band arrangement, you probably don't want it to take up that much space in the mix, so you might instead just stick a single pencil condenser on the 12th fret or something. Make clear choices and commit to your choices, but you know, having a few throwaway mics that you can use or not use is also a good thing too, I think. So moving on, bass DI, radial passive DI running into one of the preamps on my RME, which is just, you know, clean and transparent. I usually find that captures a nice bass sound, so we'll do that. I have a Trace Elliott bass cab. For a long time, I would usually mic bass cabs with a combination of a dynamic and large diaphragm condenser. But lately I've just been sticking a single dynamic, usually an SE V7X. That works great, so I'll probably do that. Guitar scratch, which will be through the Ampero. We will have a DI split as well. Usually I'll double mic a guitar cab. I'll do something like close mic, off axis, and then probably my C414 set further back in the room. I don't know for sure if we are actually going to track any acoustic for this song, but if we do, I've got those tracks ready. I probably will do a single mic, but I have 2 tracks set up. I feel like with this arrangement, it might be nice to have a bit of room sound, so a mic set further back just to push the acoustic a little bit further back in the mix, because I don't think it will want to be an overly prominent thing in the arrangement. Or I might do an over-the-shoulder mic along with a 12th fret mic. For piano, I'll use the Bifaley 4-on-4s again as close mics. Another stereo pair set further back in the room in XY configuration. I'll use my SE7 pencil condensers. That might change on the day, but that's a good starting point, I think, for the piano, because I haven't heard it yet in the song. I don't quite know how prominent it's going to want to be in the arrangement. So that there'll be a bit of figuring out of that on the day, I think. Harmonica, I've never actually recorded harmonica before, so that'll be quite a fun one. I'm going to use the SM7B. I think that's the most appropriate mic out of everything that I own. I'm guessing, based on the song, the harmonica is going to be like more of a clean, like natural harmonica sound, like your Bob Dylan kind of thing, as opposed to like a blues harmonica through like a bullet mic into a tube guitar amp, and they get like an overdriven, saturated sort of sound out of the amp, and you'd mic up that amp. But I don't think that's going to be the case for this harmonica part. My vocal scratch track, I have drum talkback as well running into the session. I use RME Total Mix FX for all my input monitoring, so I'm listening to everything 0 latency, and I send out all my headphone mixes through Total Mix as well. So I don't need the drum talkback actually in the Pro Tools session to monitor it, but I usually chuck it in there just because it's a mic that's plugged in, so I may as well record it, and if it does something cool, I can blend that in with the drum mix. For the actual vocal tracking, we'll use my Neumann TLM 103, which is normally what I use for most vocals. That's kind of like my main vocal mic here. For BVs, normally I switch to an SM7B. So those are all my mic choices. Preamp wise, I have a Yamaha 8-channel preamp, the MLA8. Most of my drum mics on the Yamaha, with the exceptions being my overheads are on a set of Golden Age Projects pre-73 Mark IIIs. Those are Neve 1073 style preamps. I like a Neve 1073 on my overheads usually. I'm not overly attached to that choice, but yeah, that's usually what I go for. Snare top is my WA12 Warm Audio 500 series preamp. That is an API style preamp, and it has a cool feature on it, a tone button, which changes something in the impedance, I think. Gives it kind of like a sort of mid bump that just pushes the sound forward a bit, and API pre's in general have that sort of punchy kind of sound to them. The Art Pro MPA2 2-channel preamp I have, I'm using the first channel of that on snare bottom. Nothing really behind that choice, it's just one of the preamps that I have. For most of the mics, the Yamaha, there's just something in the transient response that I quite like on drums. Most of the reason for using the Yamaha is just because it's an 8-channel preamp that I own and covers a lot of the drums. When you're starting out, interface preamps are more than good enough now. You know, in terms of any sonic character a preamp is going to impart, in comparison to any other bit of kit, your microphones, outboard compressors, those things are going to impart way more character, as well as the actual source material that you're recording itself and the room that you're in. All of those things are going to impart way more character than a preamp ever will, even if you're driving the preamp, if it's transformer based or tube based or both. A preamp will kind of saturate more if you're driving it harder, but preamps are kind of the icing on the cake, and I don't think they're super necessary. Spend your money first on all the other stuff and then get some character preamps. That's advice that I would give myself if I was starting again. My main room mics are running on the Focusrite Liquid 56 on the first 2 channels, which are the Liquid channels, and I have those set to, I think, API style emulations. There's a bunch of different ones that they do. Whether or not they sound like the actual thing, I don't know, but they sound kind of cool. My tin can, dictaphone, they're on 2 of the other Liquid 56 pre's. My other 2 room mics will be on the Yamaha as well, the last 2 channels on that. Bass DI, as I said before, on the RME onboard preamps, same as the Guitar Scratch. Bass mic I'm going to do on the WA12. Electric guitar on the Liquid pre's on the Liquid 56. Acoustic is going to be on the pre-73s. I quite like Neve style pre's on acoustic generally. Piano, again, pre-73s on the close mics. The Yamaha on the far mics, just no real reason behind that, just because they'll be available. Harmonica on the WA12. Vocals are going to be on my Bar HRK 500 series preamp. I love this preamp. I bought it, fell in love with it, and then they discontinued it. Yeah, I'm still hunting for one to buy another one second hand. They kind of have this 3-dimensional depth to them that, yeah, it just sounds really good. They also have 2 color card slots, which you can look it up, DIY RE. Color cards are essentially like mini outboard. This preamp has 2 color card slots, and one of those slots has an LA4 style compressor on it, which is great for tracking vocals with compression. A vocal compressor is the place to start. Anything you've got mic'd up, I think tracking with a bit of compression is great, but it's not that necessary. Whereas for vocals, I feel like it makes such a huge difference. I feel like it brings out the best of the singer in terms of the performance that they deliver. In their headphones gives them this more like finished, polished sound to what they're hearing. It sounds more like how they're used to hearing vocals on a record. I have a click track set up as well, just using the stock Pro Tools click, either based on a demo, or I'll get the band to play the song in the studio, and I'll just, on an app on my phone, I'll tap out the tempo and then I'll put that into Pro Tools. I send the click out through a send out from Pro Tools into Total Mix FX, which goes into one of the loopback channels on Total Mix, and then from the loopback I can then send that out to any of my headphone mixes, and then in Pro Tools I can monitor the click at whatever level I like. So if the drummer wants tons of click in their headphones, they can have that, but I can have it quiet in the control room. Yeah, that's everything in Pro Tools. So we'll go through to the live room now. I'll show you around the studio and show you what we've got going on in prep for the session.